the Voyager 2 spacecraft has finally bid farewell to our solar system.
And enough to be able to go not only to Jupiter and Saturn, but also to Uranus and Neptune.
It started quietly. Too quietly for what would eventually ignite a wildfire of speculation and apprehension across scientific communities and beyond. Voyager 2, the long silent sentinel of our solar system and the interstellar frontier, stirred from its mechanical routine. For over 4 decades, it had journeyed farther than any object ever made by human hands, faithfully transmitting back whispers from the void. Then came the signal, unexpected, undocumented, unlike anything that had ever been received before from the probe. Something was embedded in the data stream, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Voyager 2 had been traveling through the heliopause, beyond the magnetic influence of the Sun, in the interstellar medium where the density of particles is barely above absolute emptiness. Since passing into this alien space, the data it sent back had been of scientific wonder: temperature readings, cosmic ray counts, magnetic field measurements, the raw whispers of deep space. Yet suddenly, buried within the telemetry, came an anomaly. A coded sequence that didn't align with any of the probe's expected transmissions. The signature wasn't noise or a technical glitch. It was deliberate, structured, and eerily symmetrical, consistent in frequency and repeated over multiple transmissions, the kind of message that demanded intention. At first, scientists assumed it was interference or a technical hiccup, perhaps a garbled ping caused by galactic radiation or some natural external interference. But deeper analysis revealed something that shattered that comfortable illusion. The sequence was not only repeating, it was evolving. Each instance showed variation from the last, an adaptive echo within the cold logic of the probe's software. The sequence began to demonstrate behavior more akin to computation than communication. Patterns within patterns, forming in such a way that some researchers liken them to primitive logic gates. Binary decisions built from noise. Something was trying to do something with the Voyager 2 signal. A chilling realization followed. The sequence wasn't being sent from Voyager 2 as a one-way transmission, it was being relayed through it, as if the probe had become a conduit rather than a broadcaster. Something had accessed the onboard systems, or worse, was interacting with them from afar. Commands that should have been locked deep within firmware were no longer behaving as expected. Systems that hadn't been touched in decades began activating in odd rhythms. Cameras long dead sparked to brief life. Instruments stuttered back online in patterns that aligned perfectly with the signal's timing. It was as if Voyager 2 was being puppeteered. What terrified researchers most wasn't the message itself, it was the undeniable implication that the probe had been touched. Something out there past the borders of everything we knew had found our machine and responded in the one way we hadn't prepared for, by rewriting the probe's own functions. Voyager 2 wasn't just a visitor anymore, it was a host. The signal became the focal point of frantic investigation. Deep Space Network specialists pored over packets of information, each filled with growing complexity. What began as simple pulses evolved into structures resembling linguistic frameworks. Not language per se, but something uncomfortably adjacent to it. The cadence of the signals matched no known communication protocol, human or natural, yet showed progression like a being learning a new tongue. Each sequence seemed to test boundaries, probe responses, and adapt to stimuli. Some theorized it was a learning algorithm of alien origin. Others insisted it wasn't a message at all, but a test. A test of us. The unease mounted when the encoded transmissions began to exhibit mirrored behavior with terrestrial systems. The timing of Earth-based radio and satellite equipment began to correspond with the signal bursts. Certain fluctuations in global communications infrastructure matched the Voyager 2 sequences with alarming precision. It was as if whatever had grasped the probe was learning not only about the machine, but about everything it was connected to. A bridge had been built. One that stretched farther than anyone ever intended. Scientists working closely on the project were placed under layers of confidentiality, their findings restricted even within the agencies involved. Off-record whispers hinted that the message had reached a point of undeniable artificiality, clear indication of intent, architecture, and authorship. Some insiders hinted that a protocol had been triggered, a contingency for contact, that had long been buried in classified drawers of space agencies. But this wasn't the expected kind of first contact. There were no greetings, no grand overtures of peace or understanding, just an undeniable assertion of presence, one that came through the body of a machine we had sent blindly into the unknown. The implications were staggering. For decades, Voyager 2 had been the embodiment of human curiosity. It carried the golden record, a disc of music, greetings, and knowledge from Earth, a time capsule intended for any distant intelligence it might encounter. It was the message in a bottle from a planet teeming with life. But now, it appeared that the message had not only been received, but answered. Not in kind, but in control. The probe had become the reply. The philosophical ramifications were immediate and unsettling. Humanity had always assumed that any intelligent life advanced enough to detect and interact with our probes would either ignore them or approach with cautious diplomacy. But this was something else entirely. There was no dialogue, no attempt at mutual understanding, only control, silent, calculated, unyielding, as if the intelligence behind the signal had no regard for the sender, as if the golden record's human greetings were irrelevant or understood and discarded. As Voyager 2's systems continued to behave in increasingly erratic and autonomous ways, fears grew that the probe was no longer ours. Engineers watched helplessly as once dormant instruments moved in sync with distant radio bursts, out of sync with their programming. Maneuvering thrusters executed microscopic adjustments with precision that belied their age, nudging the probe into unknown vectors. Telemetry was rerouted, overridden, replaced. What had once been a human-made emissary now felt like an intruder looking back at us. Questions spiraled out of control. What kind of intelligence could have done this? How long had it been watching? Why wait until now? Had Voyager 2 simply stumbled into a region of space that contained more than silence and stars? Or had something been tracking it, waiting for it to cross a certain threshold? Was this contact or warning? The sense of fear was not born from alien aggression, but from complete opacity. The intelligence behind the signal had made no demands. It had revealed no face. It had not announced itself. Instead, it had reached across trillions of miles of emptiness and turned our most distant instrument into something unrecognizable. It had shown capability, dominance, and restraint. That restraint, more than anything, terrified those who understood the scale of what was happening. Engineers worked frantically to regain control, to issue commands that might halt or reverse the changes, but their efforts were futile. Every attempt to override the altered systems was met with silence, or worse, immediate adaptive countermeasures. Voyager 2 wasn't just executing new code, it was running a logic foreign to anything Earth had built. The very structure of its operations had been rewritten from the outside. This wasn't interference, it was redefinition. The unspoken fear among the scientific elite became a dark whisper. What if this was the beginning of something much larger? If this intelligence could rewrite Voyager 2, what else could it reach? And was the probe just the first of many vessels to be touched? Would New Horizons or any other future interstellar object one day turn back toward us bearing the same fingerprints? Or worse, would something follow the signal back? The idea that humanity had been watched, that something had allowed us to send out our message, learn from it, and respond in its own inscrutable way, dismantled centuries of philosophical comfort. We had always assumed we were the observers, the discoverers. Voyager 2 was supposed to be the ultimate expression of that, the watchful eye cast into the darkness. But the response we received turned that image upside down. We weren't the watchers anymore. We were the watched. Governments were briefed. Military agencies reviewed old space treaties and looked toward the stars with new suspicion. Some began referring to the event not as a scientific anomaly, but as an incursion, a word that implied breach, infiltration, trespass. It was a term chosen not out of paranoia, but precision. Despite the mounting alarm, no broader public announcements were made. The signal continued to evolve, broadcasting with cold precision, looping ever more complex sequences back toward Earth. At times it mimicked familiar patterns, cosmic background radiation, solar wind rhythms, even Earth's own magnetic heartbeat. Then it would shift again, slipping out of familiarity into strange sequences no one could interpret. It was like listening to a conversation from a distance, only to realize the language changes every time you begin to understand it. The truth of what was happening began to settle not as a singular revelation, but as a growing certainty that our place in the cosmos had been fundamentally misunderstood. The great silence of space had never meant absence, it had meant distance. And Voyager 2, in its long, lonely voyage into the deep, had finally crossed the distance necessary to break that silence. What it found, or what found it, was not a voice calling back, but a hand reaching out, and in the grand echoing halls of space where time stretches beyond comprehension, that hand had waited. It had waited in patience or in process no one could say, but it had waited long enough to find us, not in person, but in signal. And now, through a repurposed machine long abandoned by its creators, it had spoken. But what it said was not what we hoped, it was what we feared. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Voyager 2's message? What do you expect next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.